listening to him, I got to admit it, I feel a little bit nauseous to see someone take such a self-righteous position about something which might be a mistake.
J.D. Vance, the Vice President, is at the microphone, just sort of pushing the government's policy position that they're going to hit fraud, social spending fraud in the state of Minnesota, which has been, from what we've heard and seen, considerable. The government, the administration, blaming this on the rule of Tim Walz, the Democrat governor of the state of Minnesota, who of course ran for vice president in the last presidential election. But we heard the president's press secretary not just doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on the argument that the shooting in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, was absolutely justified, just as her boss, the president, argued on social media, as has been argued by Kirsty Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary. Listening to that with us, we got, of course, Anna and Adam, and we're going to be joined by Lara Spirit from Washington. I mean, there they are. Of course, they're not going to back away from this line, because how can they? If anything, they're going to push it harder and harder.
Well, I think this news conference shows, if anything, that they're worried, that they realise that something seriously has gone wrong. And what they're trying to do is to argue a generality, saying that there are all these threats to you, the American citizens, and we are intervening to protect them, and we face this vast left-wing conspiracy trying to stop us. What they're not saying necessarily is that the woman who was killed was part of that left-wing conspiracy. And interesting, too, that unlike Noem, we didn't see either of them as yet go into the details of the specific incident which Donald Trump ruled on last night. So I think they're acknowledging they've got a problem. And I have to say, it is the first sign of an autocrat when they get into trouble to say there's this big threat outside and we're trying to protect you. The problem, of course, is in this case, it wasn't a Somali rapist that got shot. It was, a white middle-class mom of 3 children. Difficult for them to explain. And I've just been looking at the statistics, and we do have to see this. This is one of the areas where America is very different from us. How many people killed by law enforcement in America in the last 12 months? Over 1,200. How many people shot by law enforcement in this country? 2. So we are talking about a level of violence in America which is completely alien to us.
Yeah, I can now bring into the conversation Lara Spirit from Washington, D.C., the Times Washington correspondent. Hello to you, Lara.
Hi, John.
Hi, Laura. Do tell us what you make of what you've just been hearing. We're going to go back for questions to the Vice President and the President's Press Secretary. But what did you make of what you heard? Very much doubling down on that aggressive defence of the shooting in Minnesota.
Yes, I mean, we have heard quite a bit from J.D. Vance in the last 24 hours about this shooting particularly, and he has been referring to, the woman who was shot as a leftist, has very much come out fighting and saying that this was an act of self-defense by the agent in question, who fired what appeared to be 3 shots at the car of the woman who was fatally wounded in that attack. Now, clearly at this point, there is a very, very striking partisan divide in the way that footage has been interpreted, both when you compare the response of Tim Walz, the, of course, Democratic governor of Minnesota, and the mayor in Minneapolis, with, for example, the response of Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, and notably, I would say, J.D. Vance, who's been even more forthright than some of the other Trump cabinet ministers in this area. And that's why he'll be there at the podium. That's why he's there at the podium right now talking.
And I think he's doing exactly as you suggest there. Lara Spirit is here with us, Washington correspondent there in D.C., and Anna Mihailova and Adam Boulton, of course, still here in the studio. Lara, I mean, again, there was the Vice President asserting that the shooting of Renee Nicole Good by this ICE agent was self-defense, that there was an attempt here to use the car as a deadly weapon. I mean, we've heard, that assertion. We've heard it absolutely rebutted by those, including many who were there, and even more, of course, who watched the tape of what actually happened. But let me just mention this to you, Laura. I was talking a bit earlier on to one of the Republican Party's major donors, and he was pushing the line a little bit further and saying that his understanding was that the woman in the car, Renee Nicole Good, as well as the woman who was heard on one of those tapes, expressing horror, loudly shouting in horror at what she was witnessing there, were both of them paid agitators, that both of them were left-wing activists. When I asked him on what did he base that assertion, he said, well, there's intelligence. It all got very woolly at this point. It wasn't remotely clear to me that there was such intelligence. However, Lara, do you hear anything on that subject at all?
Well, this is part of the difficulty of a moment like this, because on the one hand, you have, as you heard JD Vance allude to there, a desire to get to the bottom of exactly what happened and to have further facts. We should say that the investigation is completely in its midst, it's underway, and we don't yet have the full picture of what happened. On the other hand, you have people like JD Vance in that press conference there being completely unequivocal at other moments about what they believe happened, and saying, as you've just mentioned, that there is, the words of JD Vance in one post on X this morning was that the officer was defending his life against a deranged leftist who tried to run him over, and in other posts, Vance was accusing people who were suggesting that she was trying to flee the scene rather than ram the agent as gaslighting. He said the gaslighting is off the charts, and I'm having none of it. So this is a lot. I would say long running. This is a kind of consistent case that JD Vance has been making since the wake of this shooting, and so I think in that respect, it's pretty unsurprising to see him on the podium making it again with Levitt.
No, and as far as we are certainly remotely aware, there is no intelligence, at least that we're aware of, that supports that argument that the woman who was shot and the woman we heard shouting in horror were agitators, let alone paid agitators. There's nothing to support that contention at all.
No, and there's also...
Sorry, go on, Adam.
No, I was also going to say, when he says everyone's lying against this, there is no clear evidence that this woman was driving at any of the ICE officers. That seems to me to be the biggest weakness in Vance's claims.
But you've also had Minnesota officials today say they're being blocked from investigating properly by the FBI. So we go back to that thing of how the Trump administration tests the system in so many ways. This is starting to look like another one of those. And if you're making such a big argument about the motivations and the nature of the background of the person, then why wouldn't you let them investigate properly and then make those arguments? Yeah.
Last word from you, Laura. I know you've got a lot to do, and I'm sure a lot to write on that question of the state of Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension being barred from taking part in the investigation. Well, look, whatever view you take of this, if you're looking for trust and the worry of that trust being broken, well, that move to exclude the state authority is just going to intensify that distrust, Lara, isn't it, on any reading?
I mean, this is something that you've seen in a number of cities, not just Minneapolis. We've seen, obviously, a very open conflict between federal law enforcement agencies, particularly ICE, and the local, often Democratic leadership in cities like, for example, Chicago, where I was in September, where there was a huge amount of opposition from the governor, J.B. Pritzker, but also the mayor and other local officials to ICE. And that friction you're seeing, I think, even more sensitively articulated now in Minneapolis, where we've heard from Waltz very, very clearly. He said he had a simple message. He did not want more federal help in the state. He wanted the state's National Guard to be on notice. But beyond that, he did not want any further direct involvement from President Trump or Noam. And you've also heard, and I can't repeat it on the radio because it was just full of expletives, but from the mayor, the Democratic mayor, really trying to force ICE out of the city as well. And when it comes to the investigations, I think that all becomes really difficult because you're in a situation where people want the right and the accurate answers about what happened, and you have conflict between these various different agencies, politicians and figures, and that complicates the matter even further.
Okay, Lara Spirit in Washington, D.C. for the Times. Thanks, as always, Lara, for giving your take on these breaking developments. There was J.D. Vance just backing up the justification as they are framing it for the shooting of Renee Wood on the streets of Minneapolis just yesterday. A point just to make here. We heard what you would call, I suggest, something of an inconsistency, a moving, shifting narrative here. There, having begun by defending the shooting as an act of self-defence against a political agitator, the Vice President went on very shortly afterwards to tell us he could not know what was in the heart of Renee Good at the moment she was manoeuvring that car in a way that led the ICE agent to shoot her dead.
And then he said she'd been brainwashed.
And then he said she had been brainwashed. But I contrast this now with the post of President Trump soon after the shooting, the killing yesterday, where the president said, far from saying he could not know what was in the mind or the heart of Rennie Wood, he said, and I'm quoting, "She violently, willfully and viciously ran over the ICE agent." He then went on to say it was hard to believe the officer is alive. Well, if you've seen the video on social media, I suspect you may not take that as a remotely convincing account, and I put that as mildly as it's conceivably possible to do that. And the officer was barely brushed by the vehicle. The idea that it's hard to believe that he survived that alive seems absolutely absurd.
Well, I have to say, I think Trump was clearly misrepresenting what happened, but I also think that J.D. Vance was misrepresenting and prejudging what had happened. I mean, listening to him, I got to admit it, I feel a little bit nauseous to see someone take such a self-righteous position about something which might be a mistake. I mean, the point is, he's saying, everyone who is saying that this issue is serious is someone who is opposing the government strategy at ICE, which is simply not true. I mean, it is possible that people do the wrong thing and should admit it and apologise for it and be held to account for it. But he's not prepared to do that. He just wants to roll over everybody, ignore the issues, shut down the inquiry and declare that we knew what happened. And I don't think any responsible legislator or political leader should behave like that.
But what they did was they immediately jumped in with a narrative, and it worked in many ways. I mean, if you look at the responses to all those videos, and there are videos from multiple angles, but it's frankly fascinating seeing how many... just how polarised the reaction is. I mean, just for the number of posts I saw expressing horror at the ICE agents, there were just as many posts repeating this vision. It's like people were watching two different things. That will be the case on social media. There was a poll published yesterday, which I discussed in my polling slot just ahead of this show, which I think is in some way really quite interesting. That there is not overwhelming support for the way that ICE is conducting its operations. This is a poll, as I say, yesterday. Of those who think that ICE is behaving too forcefully, yes, of course, there's the expected, deep divisions along party lines. Among Democrats, 83% of people think that's no great surprise. Among Republicans, 16%, though, also think that the ICE agency is acting too forcefully. That's 16% of Republican voters. And even among independents, the crucial demographic which decides American elections, 56% of people believe that ICE is acting too forcefully. So there is a broad view on balance that Americans do not support the way that ICE is conducting. And this was published, of course, before the shooting in Minneapolis. Yeah, but, you think, watching J.D. Vance, you think the old maxim, who guards the guards? Listening to him, the answer to that right now is no one at the moment. Yeah, well, they have their narrative, and they're going to stick by that and double down and press it, and obviously seek to control the legal process, the investigatory process from here on in, because the state will not have a hand in all of that. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, earlier on called for that to be reversed. And it was pointed out a bit earlier on that the FBI was cooperating with the local police in Minneapolis. So there was at least that level of cooperation, but now the door has been shut.